Imagine the thick, blinding fog rolling off the Atlantic. It's the kind of fog that swallows sound and light whole, turning the entire world into a cold, damp, and truly terrifying gray maze. For centuries, for anyone sailing the rough waters off the coast of North America, this meant almost certain disaster for ships. The sea fog was a silent, unseen killer, responsible for untold wreckages and thousands of lost lives. Then came the foghorn, that loud, mournful, deep bellow that sliced through the thickest gloom, acting as a desperately needed, life-saving audible landmark. It was more than just a piece of machinery. It was a brilliant, simple invention rooted in genius, and it saved countless human lives across the globe. But the man who invented and perfected this incredible technology, a celebrated Canadian engineer named JDCF Fraser, met an end as strange and confusing as the deepest sea fog itself. In the year 1916, at the very height of his fame and professional power, he vanished without a trace, leaving behind a cottage locked from the inside, an impenetrable lighthouse, a cryptic note, and a mystery that has baffled investigators, historians, and coastal communities for over a century. Was his disappearance a simple, tragic accident, a desperate planned escape to avoid shame, or something far more sinister involving treason and enemies lurking in the shadow of his own great life-saving invention? Get comfortable, settle in, because we're about to dive deep into the chilling and complex tale of the mysterious death of the inventor of the foghorn. The year was 1916, and the world was consumed by chaos. The Great War was raging overseas in Europe, ripping families apart and changing the map forever. But out on the rugged, isolated, wave-battered coast of Nova Scotia, near the mouth of the vital Halifax harbor, a different and much quieter drama was slowly unfolding. Our story centers on John Dennis Clifford Fraser, known throughout the Canadian maritime world simply by his initials, JDCF Fraser. He was far more than just the government official who headed the Canadian Lighthouse Board. He was a genuine celebrity in his own right, a true genius who had taken early, unreliable attempts at sea warnings and perfected the steam-powered foghorn into the powerful, reliable instrument we recognize today. Before Fraser's work, fog warnings were a haphazard affair of weak bells, unreliable whistles, or small, deafening cannons that didn't carry far in the dense moisture. After Fraser's engineering brilliance, there was the powerful, unmistakable, deep wail that cut through miles of fog and meant only one thing: safety and a warning of land nearby. By 1916, his patented invention was mandatory, saving sailors' lives all over the world, cementing his legacy as a hero of the sea. Fraser, a man in his late 60s, should have been enjoying a relaxed, comfortable retirement, basking in the glow of his well-earned success and the gratitude of the seafaring world. Instead, he chose a life of deliberate isolation. He preferred the company of the massive, towering white lighthouses and the crushing, rhythmic roar of the North Atlantic, often spending long stretches away from the comforts of Halifax society. His favorite spot, and the location that would become the epicenter of this lasting mystery, was the small but strategically vital Sambro Island Light Station. This island, a collection of exposed, jagged rocks, was situated in a critical location near one of the world's busiest wartime ports. Here, the waves of the Atlantic crashed with a relentless, deafening rhythm, a constant, powerful reminder of the raw, dangerous chaos he had managed to tame with his precise, mechanical invention. Fraser was famously more than just an inventor. He was a meticulous, intensely private, almost obsessive man. Everything in his professional life and private space was ordered, categorized, and clean, from the highly polished brass scientific instruments to the detailed ledgers where he logged every single penny of government spending and his own personal expenses. This fierce, lifelong attention to detail, order, and routine is the first crucial element of our story, because what happened next, the complete, inexplicable vanishing act, simply did not fit the man, his nature, or his fiercely controlled life. The sun struggled to burn through the persistent morning fog on April 17, 1916, when the first whispers of trouble began, quickly escalating into alarm. Fraser had been staying alone at Sambro Island for several days, supervising complex equipment upgrades on the light tower and the fog signaling apparatus. His routine was as reliable as the turning of the tide. He woke before dawn, had his solitary breakfast of toast and tea in his small cottage, and would be seen soon after, working diligently on the machinery by mid-morning. He was a fixture of the station. But on this specific morning, the usual sounds of clanking tools, the rhythmic turning of the equipment, and the sound of Fraser's distinctively loud, booming voice were all eerily absent. The few lightkeepers who worked the remote island, practical men who knew Fraser's habits like the exact timing of the moon cycle, quickly grew uneasy. They headed to his small, private cottage, knocking firmly on the door. Only silence answered. They tried the handle gently, then firmly. It was locked securely from the inside. This was the first contradiction. They carefully peered through the tiny window pane. The room was perfectly neat and tidy. His bed was untouched, indicating he hadn't slept there or had left before getting into it. More tellingly, his personal, daily items, his heavy gold watch, his leather wallet containing cash, and even his prescription glasses, were all laid out neatly on the dresser. It looked exactly as if he had just stepped out for a moment, intending to return immediately, except that he hadn't. Fearing illness or an accident, they eventually used a heavy iron bar to break down the door. The cottage was, definitively, empty. The ingenious inventor of the world's most vital safety signal had completely vanished into thin air. It was a situation that defied all logical explanation. Sambro Island is small, a rugged, rocky outcrop, surrounded on all sides by treacherous, fast-moving water and rough currents. There was no sign that his small personal skiff was missing. There was no obvious evidence of a struggle, and the few footprints they found led only from the cottage path back towards the sea cliff. The first, most immediate, and most dreadful thought among the keepers was suicide. But the perfectly organized state of his belongings, coupled with the security of the locked door, seemed to argue powerfully against that conclusion. Why would a man planning his own and lock the door behind him and leave all his essential items? Fraser had disappeared, leaving behind only a baffling, impossible puzzle. The news quickly reached the mainland in Halifax, and within hours, a frantic, highly publicized search was organized, involving the Navy and the police. The vanishing of JDCF Fraser was not just a local incident. It became an immediate, international sensation. Newspapers in Canada, the US, and Britain all ran front-page stories on the mystery of the missing lighthouse inventor. The Royal Canadian Navy, with ships and personnel already in the bustling Halifax port, joined the dedicated lighthouse keepers and local fishermen, all of them tasked with scouring every possible inch of the island and the surrounding cold waters. The search teams crawled over the jagged, rocky outcrop, checking every hidden tidal pool, every rocky crevice large enough to conceal a man, and even the tiny, broken-down outbuildings and coal sheds. They found absolutely nothing. The deep, rough sea was equally uncooperative, yielding no secrets. The coastline in that area was notorious for its rough, powerful currents, and if a body had gone into the water, it was highly likely long gone, pulled out to the deep Atlantic. But the Mounties, the official investigators in charge, couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that Fraser had not left the island at all. Back at the cottage, a more professional, systematic examination of the premises was underway. The door, locked from the inside, remained the central, immovable mystery. If Fraser locked the door when leaving, he had to have the key, and the key was certainly not in the cottage. The only logical scenario, however difficult to accept, was that he had somehow walked out, locked the door, and then engineered his disappearance after taking the final steps away from his own room. They desperately needed context. Detectives interviewed every soul on the island again, trying to pinpoint the last definitive sighting. It was 2 nights earlier. Fraser had been having a standard dinner with the station's principal keeper, William Bell. The conversation had been completely normal, mostly shop talk about equipment maintenance and the government's frustrating delays. He had seemed perhaps a little more thoughtful than usual, but certainly not distraught, angry, or suicidal. Then, in the back of a rarely used desk drawer in Fraser's writing area, a detective found the first concrete clue, a single, folded piece of paper. It was a note, written in Fraser's distinctive, spidery, yet neat handwriting. The message was short, chilling in its brevity, and completely cryptic. Gone to catch up with the sea fog, back soon. This note, rather than providing closure, only deepened the impossible nature of the mystery. Was it a dark joke? A philosophical farewell to the element he'd tried to master? Or was it a purposeful, final piece of the Foghorn Inventor's meticulously planned puzzle, designed to point the police in the wrong direction? The investigators knew one thing for certain. They were dealing with a planned, deliberate vanishing act. As the exhaustive search across the rocky island continued to yield absolutely nothing, the investigators were forced to change focus. They shifted their attention entirely to the most obvious structure on the island, the lighthouse itself. The Sambro Island Light Tower was more than just the station. It was Fraser's professional sanctuary and his greatest source of pride. It was a massive, cylindrical stone structure, housing his latest and most experimental foghorn and light equipment. Fraser, being the head of the lighthouse board, spent almost all of his waking hours up in that tower, tinkering, calibrating, and obsessing over the machinery. The keeper's cottage was separated from the main light tower by a short, paved walkway. The search team decided to check the tower one more time, with a level of scrutiny far beyond their initial sweep. They knew Fraser was utterly obsessed with security and mechanical reliability. Every door, latch, and safety catch on the island was bolted, double-locked, and specifically secured to handle the worst possible Atlantic hurricane, a professional habit that now seemed to work against their investigation. This time, as they approached the base of the tower, the chief detective noticed something peculiar about the heavy, wrought iron door at the tower's base. It was secured with Fraser's own specialized, custom-made padlock, a complex brass mechanism that he had personally designed to be tamper-proof. Only Fraser and the station's principal keeper, Mr. William Bell, possessed a key to this particular lock. Bell confirmed under questioning that he had not used his key in weeks. Using Bell's key, they unlocked the padlock and slowly pulled open the heavy iron door. The tower's base was empty, completely silent, and smelled distinctly of machine oil mixed with cold, damp sea salt. They began the long, arduous climb up the winding metal staircase. Level after level, they checked the machinery rooms, the pressurized oil storage, the complex air compressor for the horn, and the massive clockwork mechanism that turned the light. Everything was found to be in perfect working order, exactly as the meticulous Fraser would have left it. But when they reached the very top, the expansive, glass-enclosed lantern room where the gigantic Fresnel lens stood, they encountered the second, even more baffling piece of the puzzle. The narrow access door leading into the lantern room itself was locked securely from the inside. This presented an impossible scenario that defied all the laws of physics and common sense. If Fraser had managed to enter the light tower and then climbed all the way to the top, how could he have locked the heavy inner door and then disappeared without the key? They were facing a double vanishing act. He vanished from his secured cottage, and then, if he had entered the lighthouse, he vanished again from its locked core chamber. Determined to confirm the status of the top room, the investigators employed a long, wooden ladder, leaning it precariously against the exterior glass. Climbing up, they peered through the thick panes of glass and confirmed that the key was definitely missing from the inside lock, and the room was utterly empty, spotless, and undisturbed, the magnificent lens silently waiting for the night. The implications were staggering. Fraser had used his genius to create a perfect, sealed environment, proving that his disappearance was not a fluke, but a calculated, engineered performance. With the impossibility of the locked doors firmly established, the search moved off the island and back to the bustling mainland. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the famous Mounties, began the painstaking process of looking into Fraser's personal life and his recent movements in Halifax, the nearby major city. They started with the knowledge that Fraser was a man of absolute meticulousness, meaning his professional life, meticulously documented in government files, was an open book. His personal dealings, however, were intensely private and guarded. Their digging soon uncovered a few crucial and interesting facts that helped paint a darker picture than his public image suggested. Firstly, Fraser had recently been consumed by a bitter and heated dispute with the federal government over funding. He was desperate for the government to adopt his new, far more powerful type of fog signal, a highly complex compressed air system that he was convinced was vastly superior and safer than the older, slower steam horns. He felt the politicians were deliberately undermining his life's work, prioritizing budget cuts over the safety of the sailors. He was angry, frustrated, and felt betrayed. Secondly, and perhaps far more concerning given the wartime context, he was deeply worried about the ongoing war effort. Sambro Island was situated right at the mouth of Halifax Harbor, which was not only one of the busiest global ports, but also the main assembly and departure point for all Allied troop and supply convoys heading across the dangerous Atlantic to Europe. German U-boats were confirmed to be lurking dangerously close off the coast, and Fraser, as the man in charge of all maritime safety, would have possessed sensitive, critical information about shipping movements, convoy schedules, and the harbor's defensive layout. Could his disappearance have something direct to do with espionage? Was it remotely possible that he had been somehow taken or kidnapped by German agents who wanted to silence him or, worse, gain information about the harbor's defenses? The idea felt outlandish for a respected civil servant in his late 60s, but the secured locks and the isolation of the island made a silent, secret kidnapping a frighteningly logical possibility. The Mounties also checked the records at the telegraph office in Halifax. They confirmed Fraser had sent one short, coded telegram the day before he vanished. It was addressed simply to ABCD in Montreal, a destination with no obvious connection to his work. The message was short and cold. Experiment complete. Leaving now. This cryptic communication felt less like the final message of a man about to meet a tragic accident and more like the operational sign-off of a calculated operative. The focus of the deepening investigation shifted dramatically from the threat of the war and the logistics of the sea to the most common motive of all, money. Fraser's personal finances were scrutinized, as this is so often where a hidden truth or a desperate motive lies buried. Fraser was not poor. He was a wealthy man, earning a good salary and drawing substantial royalties from the patents on his perfected Foghorn technology. His known estate was valued at a considerable amount. Detectives pulled his comprehensive financial records and discovered something truly unexpected and deeply suspicious. Just 6 weeks before his highly publicized disappearance, Fraser had quietly taken out a massive, additional life insurance policy. The total sum was enormous, enough to comfortably ensure his family was financially secure for several generations, effectively making them rich. The terms of the policy were reviewed meticulously. It was clear that the policy was designed to pay out in the event of his death, and critically, it included a common clause specific to maritime workers, covering accidental death or disappearance at sea. However, the policy contained the standard, non-negotiable stipulation that it would not pay out in the event of suicide. This new piece of financial detail changed the entire calculus of the case. If Fraser had been planning to end his own life, driven by despair or professional shame, he would never have gone through the immense trouble of securing a policy that wouldn't benefit his family. This piece of evidence strongly suggested that whatever happened, Fraser did not intend to die, or at the very least, he didn't intend for his death to look like a suicide. This effectively eliminated the simple suicide theory and brought the investigators back to the original, unsettling options: a genuine accident that somehow resulted in a locked room, or calculated foul play, be it an ordinary crime or the more exotic, compelling idea of wartime espionage and a planned defection. The cryptic note, "Gone to catch up with the sea fog, back soon," now appeared far less like a final, despairing suicide note and much more like an intentional distraction, a deliberate misdirection, or possibly a coded message to a waiting accomplice. With the evidence pointing strongly toward a planned disappearance, the investigation team, led by the Mounties, made a decisive return to Sambro Island. They focused their attention entirely on the lightkeepers again, especially the principal keeper, William Bell. Bell was a respected, long-serving man known for his professional loyalty and many years of dedicated service to Fraser. But given the layers of complexity in the mystery, he was now treated not just as a reliable witness, but as a person of intense interest, and perhaps a potential suspect or accomplice. The detectives pressed Bell aggressively about Fraser's last documented evening, focusing on every small detail of their interaction. Bell confirmed they had shared a simple dinner together. The meal, he recalled, consisted of freshly salted fish, boiled potatoes, and strong tea, consumed in near silence in the small common room. Fraser had spent the entire time talking intensely about his professional obsession, the foghorn. He complained bitterly that the old, antiquated steam system was dreadfully inefficient and that the stubborn government's delay in fully adopting his new, superior compressed air system was reckless and, in his view, going to directly cost more lives in the long run. He was passionate about this, using strong language, but Bell insisted he wasn't outwardly hysterical or mentally distraught. He was professionally angry. Bell did recall one specific, highly unusual incident from that day. Fraser had received a small, completely unmarked package earlier that afternoon. It had been delivered by the weekly supply boat, dropped off quickly, and signed for by Fraser himself. As soon as Fraser received it, he immediately took the package, unopened, directly up to the lantern room at the top of the tower, and explicitly told Bell not to bother him for the rest of the day, as he had sensitive work to do. Bell naturally assumed it was some necessary technical part for the new equipment he was testing, or maybe some specialized navigational instruments. Bell also provided a second, telling detail about Fraser's behavior in the days leading up to his disappearance. He mentioned that Fraser seemed increasingly worried about unauthorized visitors or security breaches. He had, with uncharacteristic urgency, insisted that every single door, window, and small auxiliary gate on the island, no matter how tiny or rarely used, be locked and double-checked multiple times every single night. This unusual level of professional paranoia was highly abnormal, even for the famously security-conscious Fraser. Finally, Bell addressed the mysterious note found in the drawer, the one about catching up with the sea fog. Bell admitted that the specific phrasing and the way it was signed felt exactly like something the often cryptic Fraser would write as a kind of high-minded, strange joke about embracing the element he had spent his life battling. But he couldn't confirm if it was truly serious or meant as a final message. The note, Bell concluded, did not sound like the heavy, emotional final goodbye of a man committing suicide, but rather the strange, detached observation of a man moving on to a different stage. The most difficult, central obstacle to the investigation remained the two locked doors, especially the inner door to the lantern room at the top of the lighthouse. How could a person lock themselves securely into a confined, upper space, and then completely vanish without the key, leaving no possible means of escape? The solution, if one existed, had to be mechanical, relying on the genius of the missing man. An elite team of structural engineers and expert locksmiths was quickly called in from Halifax to address this seemingly impossible paradox. They meticulously examined the locks on Fraser's cottage and then the far more robust security of the lighthouse. The cottage door was secured by a standard, though very high-quality, government-issue lock. The key was simply, stubbornly missing. The heavy metal lock on the lighthouse door was much more complex, built to withstand years of storms. The engineers finally reached a consensus, presenting a possible, albeit extremely unlikely, mechanical solution. Fraser was, fundamentally, an inventor who loved mechanical puzzles, tricks, and ingenious, clever systems. It was entirely possible, the experts theorized, that he had installed a specialized, temporary mechanical device. This device could have been a kind of timed release or a delayed action mechanism that allowed him to use the key to lock the door from the outside and then retreat quickly, with the device subsequently pulling the key back through the door's frame or slot using a thin wire or string, leaving it available for him to retrieve once he was safely outside. This feat was technically achievable, especially in the hands of a mechanical savant like Fraser, who was intimately familiar with the tolerances and workings of every lock he used. But why go to such extreme, incredibly complicated, and risky lengths just to exit a building? It felt like he was not just leaving. He was intentionally staging a highly complex, deceptive puzzle or purposefully engineering a scenario that was designed to look utterly fake and impossible. This conclusion was critical. It suggested a very clear, professional intent to mislead or distract the people looking for him, whether those people were the police, his own family, or possibly a hostile organization. He wanted to believe he was dead or trapped. The engineers spent hours searching every inch of the lock mechanisms for any sign of such a hidden device, but frustratingly, they found no evidence attached directly to the door locks themselves. Fraser's genius had covered his tracks perfectly. If Fraser had successfully engineered an elegant, theatrical exit from the highly secured light tower, he must have had a designated plan for where to go next. Either a place to hide temporarily on the small island or, more likely, a definitive way to get off the island without using the official boat landing. Sambro Island is dominated by jagged, exposed rock with very little cover. Hiding was impossible. The investigation team then switched focus to historical records, pulling up old maps and original blueprints of the lighthouse station dating back to its initial construction. They made a fascinating discovery. Decades ago, during the original building phase, a small, emergency supply tunnel had been built. This tunnel was originally intended to allow the keepers to quickly and safely move critical coal and oil supplies directly from a small, protected cove at the island's rear up to the main storage rooms during periods of terrible storms when the main path was impassable. It had long since fallen into disuse and was generally considered sealed off and forgotten. The tunnel's forgotten entrance was supposedly hidden behind a collapsing, rotting wood shed down by the water line, exactly where the powerful, rough currents made a normal landing extremely difficult and unlikely. The investigators, assisted by the keepers and armed with pickaxes and shovels, spent several hours clearing the accumulated debris and rotten wood. They eventually exposed a heavy iron grate, entirely rusted shut. Once they managed to finally pry the grate open using force, they confirmed the existence of a dark, cramped, and damp tunnel leading upward and back inland towards the base of the light tower. This was the highly improbable, hidden passage, the key to the whole mystery. The problem was what they found next. The inland end of the tunnel, which opened into a maintenance room near the tower's foundation, was completely sealed. It was blocked by a thick, fresh layer of crude, fast-drying concrete. Someone had not only recently used this secret, forgotten passage, but had also meticulously sealed it up behind them. The question immediately arose. Did Fraser seal himself inside the island, trapping himself, or was he sealed in by someone else? The hunt for the missing inventor, originally focused on a tragic accident or murder, suddenly took on a new, much darker dimension focused entirely on calculated concealment. The discovery of the sealed, secret tunnel was, without a doubt, the monumental breakthrough the investigators had been desperately searching for. It eliminated the mystery of the impossible vanishing act and replaced it with the unsettling reality of a meticulously planned escape. The team worked with intense urgency to chip away at the crude concrete blockade they found at the inner end of the passage. They noted that the concrete mix was fast-drying and surprisingly strong, clearly applied by someone who possessed a basic knowledge of construction but was in a massive hurry and did not care about neatness. It was designed to be temporary but extremely effective, preventing anyone from easily following or breaking through quickly. When they finally managed to smash and pry their way through the hardened concrete, the cramped, dark tunnel opened into a small, rarely used maintenance room situated deep within the base of the light tower, a room that only the head keeper and, critically, Fraser himself would have known about or used. Inside the maintenance room, the scene provided a disturbing but clear record of Fraser's final actions on the island. First, they found a small, neatly arranged pile of clothing, an old, heavy-duty seaman's coat and a pair of sturdy, worn work boots, both positively identified as belonging to Fraser. This strongly suggested that he had methodically changed out of his more formal, everyday attire before entering the tunnel, preparing himself for rough travel or the elements. Second, directly next to the tunnel entrance, they found a small, half-empty bag of cement powder and a dirty, caked trowel. This finding was the final, irrefutable confirmation. The concrete blockade had been created right here, by Fraser himself, minutes before his final departure. Fraser had sealed the tunnel expertly behind him, ensuring that if anyone discovered the secret passage, they would lose precious time breaking through the barrier. But the motive behind this action was still confusing. If he simply intended to hide on the island, he wouldn't need to block his exit point. If he intended to leave the island and use the sea entrance, he would have left the inland entrance open for an easy return. The evidence overwhelmingly suggested a staged, complex, and highly theatrical escape, one designed to create confusion and buy himself as much time as possible. The Mounties seriously began to consider a new and much darker theory. that JDCF Fraser hadn't died at all, but had perfectly orchestrated a complete, legally recognizable disappearance to escape a problem far bigger than just a dispute over government funding for his foghorn patents. He was planning to be legally declared dead, but he was very much alive. Following the trail of the escape theory, the Mounties redoubled their efforts to dig deeper into Fraser's supposedly flawless financial life, looking for the kind of severe pressure that would motivate a respected man to abandon his name and career. While his public professional ledgers, which concerned the Lighthouse Board, were found to be absolutely perfect, organized down to the very last shilling, a completely separate, secret bank account and investment portfolio was soon uncovered. The records of this secret account told a devastatingly different story. Fraser had been risking huge amounts of capital, speculating heavily in a high-risk venture related to wartime shipping communication technology. He was convinced he could improve the signaling and anti-collision technology used between the massive Allied convoy ships, and in doing so, make a spectacular fortune that would cement his legacy as a financial titan as well as an engineering genius. It turned out the investment had gone terribly, catastrophically wrong. The technology failed its crucial tests, and the market for the new systems collapsed almost overnight. In the desperate weeks leading up to his calculated vanishing, Fraser had quietly and quickly lost nearly every penny he possessed, including much of his personal savings and his family's inheritance. He was teetering precariously on the brink of complete, irreversible financial ruin. This catastrophic financial loss would not only have destroyed his immense personal wealth, but, far worse for a man of his pride, would have completely destroyed his professional reputation and ruined his family's secure future, leaving them destitute. For a man obsessed with order, control, and public honor, the humiliation and public exposure of such a spectacular failure might genuinely have been considered worse than death itself. The massive, recently acquired life insurance policy suddenly made perfect sense. It was no longer a simple safeguard, but a final, necessary act of provision. Fraser would vanish, allowing the police and the courts to declare him legally deceased after the mandatory one-year period, and the policy would then pay out the enormous sum, saving his family from utter poverty and preserving his name from the stain of public shame and failure. The cryptic note, "Gone to catch up with the sea fog, back soon," now seemed to imply he was embracing the anonymity, silence, and finality of the sea, giving up his identity to secure his family's future. Just when the theory of financial ruin seemed to definitively close the case, providing a rational motive for the complex escape, a highly disturbing and serious report arrived in Halifax from Naval Intelligence. A small, independent coastal fishing trawler had reported an authenticated sighting of a German U-boat lurking menacingly just off the coast of Sambro Island, exactly 2 nights before Fraser vanished. The timing of this sighting was too perfect and too close to be dismissed as a coincidence. The initial, exotic idea of German espionage was immediately revived by the military authorities, but now with a chilling new twist. What if Fraser hadn't been violently kidnapped, but had willingly gone with the Germans, not as a victim, but as an asset? Investigators remembered his profound, bitter anger at the Canadian government for decisively rejecting his new, superior foghorn system and ignoring his expertise. Fraser was a deeply proud, often arrogant man who felt his genius was being criminally wasted. If his own government was callously rejecting his superior, life-saving technology, why shouldn't he sell it to the highest bidder, the enemy? Halifax Harbor was the single most crucial military target in North America. Fraser's unique, intimate knowledge of the complex shipping lanes, the secret Canadian defense signals, and the exact locations and capabilities of his own foghorns would be invaluable, absolutely critical information for a U-boat commander looking to slip past the defenses and sink Allied supply and troop ships. This stunning theory of treason explained almost every element of the mystery. The cryptic telegram, which could have been a coded message to a waiting German contact, ABCD, in Montreal being a prearranged coded drop point. The unusual paranoia about security and the necessity of sealing the tunnel behind him. He wasn't running from the law. He was running to the enemy, ready to start a new, dangerous, and globally impactful life as a defector and a traitor. The possibility was professionally shocking, but it perfectly explained the complex, highly theatrical nature of his engineered escape and vanishing act, linking his disappearance to the high stakes of the ongoing Great War. Months dragged slowly into a full year, and the intense, high-profile case of JDCF Fraser officially went cold. The initial, frantic naval and police searches were long abandoned, and the inventor was legally presumed dead, officially recorded as lost at sea. The Canadian government, deeply embarrassed by the potential espionage angle and determined to protect its reputation, quietly and discreetly investigated the German U-boat theory, but ultimately found no hard, undeniable evidence of contact with the enemy or proof that Fraser was the mysterious ABCD in Montreal. Similarly, the financial ruin story was kept strictly quiet and buried in government files to protect the honor and reputation of his grieving family. The prevailing public consensus, the simplest solution, remained that Fraser, overcome by professional shame and despair over his devastating ruined finances, had carefully and meticulously faked his own death to ensure the massive insurance policy would pay out, thereby saving his family from certain financial ruin. The entire elaborate setup, the locked cottage, the cryptic note, the sealed tunnel, and the impossible locked lantern room, was viewed as the final, complex, and brilliant project of a genius engineer, professionally designed to ensure his disappearance was officially deemed an accidental loss at sea, which guaranteed the enormous insurance payout. After the passage of 12 full months since the vanishing, the legal process was finally wrapping up. His will was scheduled to be read within weeks, and his family prepared themselves, with mixed feelings of grief and relief, to receive the huge insurance settlement that would secure their future. Then, with the case officially closed and the papers signed, one last, extraordinary object was discovered. It was found not by the police, but by a new, meticulous lightkeeper conducting a deep, comprehensive inventory check of the Sambro Island Light Tower's auxiliary systems. The object was a heavy, dull brass key, the exact, distinctive key that had been missing from the locked lighthouse lantern room. It wasn't simply lying loose on a shelf or tucked into a corner. It was found securely bolted and held tightly inside a small, intentionally hollowed-out chamber within the colossal, intricate clockwork mechanism that rotated the massive Fresnel lens, the giant light that illuminated the entire coastline. The key was a perfect fit for the inner lock. Its discovery was the final, definitive piece of the puzzle, proving beyond any doubt that Fraser had engineered his escape with a level of mechanical precision that bordered on art. The breathtaking discovery of the key explained the absolute last of the impossible puzzles that Fraser had left behind. Fraser, the mechanical genius, had never needed a flimsy rope, a complicated electrical timer, or a hidden accomplice to successfully lock the lantern room from the inside and then vanish without the key. He had used the lighthouse itself, his own greatest invention, to perform the trick. The investigators realized the full, stunning elegance of his plan. He had meticulously stepped out of the lantern room, locked the heavy inner door with the key, and then, using a small, specialized, and hidden latch or lever accessible only from the outer walkway of the tower, he had secured the key deep inside the powerful, turning gear system of the Great Light. Once the light was activated and began its nightly rotation, the entire mechanism, designed to move with slow, powerful, and relentless precision, would carry the key in a slow arc. Over the course of several hours of the light turning, the key would eventually rotate back towards the door. Then, at the predetermined point, it would either drop onto a prepared surface or, as happened, remain firmly secured in the mechanism's small, hollow space, ready to be discovered much later by someone checking the machinery. This final, brilliant stunt was Fraser's ultimate signature. It was a perfect, elegant, self-contained mechanical trick designed to ensure that the key would not be found until someone went to the incredible length of carefully dismantling the lens mechanism itself, something that no one would ever do during a hasty, routine police search. His actions were now crystal clear. He locked himself in, secured the key into the rotating gear, left the massive light running to maintain the illusion of an active station, and then descended the tower. From the maintenance room, he changed his clothes, then deliberately walked down the secret tunnel. He sealed the inland end behind him with the concrete, ensuring a long delay before he could be traced, and then he slipped out of the seaside entrance into the dark, cold embrace of the sea fog, where he was presumably picked up by a small, waiting boat, or, perhaps, the rumored German U-boat. All the impossible locks were finally explained by the one thing no one could account for: the sheer, calculating genius of the man himself. JDCF Fraser was never officially found, seen, or heard from again. He became a ghost, a legend whispered among coastal sailors and lighthouse keepers. There were, naturally, countless rumors that sprang up over the decades. A respected Canadian engineer, bearing his exact description, was reportedly spotted working on advanced navigation systems for a shady shipping magnate in the remote regions of South America. Another rumor placed a quiet, elderly gentleman matching his description running a small, sophisticated machine shop under an assumed name in the port city of Boston, specializing in repairing complex naval instruments. But none of these sightings, despite diligent follow-up by private detectives hired by the insurance company, were ever definitively confirmed or proven. The mystery of his actual fate and final destination remains completely unsolved, hovering over the Atlantic like the persistent, damp fog he fought so hard to defeat. The true, final motive for his decision is what defines his legacy. Did he use his phenomenal engineering genius to meticulously fake his death and save his family from the shame and devastation of his financial ruin? Or did his deep-seated anger, frustration, and wounded professional pride lead him to a darker alliance, becoming a professional trader who used his critical knowledge of the sea lanes to aid the enemy during the high-stakes global war? Regardless of the final truth of his motive, the inventor of the life-saving Foghorn disappeared into the very element he had dedicated his entire professional life to taming. The sea, which he had made infinitely safer for thousands of others, ultimately swallowed him whole, leaving behind only the distant, echoing sound of his great invention and the enduring, profound puzzle of his impossible vanishing act. His legacy is permanently split into two distinct, clashing sides. One side, the brilliant, celebrated hero who saved thousands of lives with his powerful horn. The other side, the dark shadow who created the perfect, flawless, locked-room mystery on a lonely island in 1916. The Sambro Island light still blazes its warning across the waves every night, and the great foghorn still bellows its deep, mournful sound, a constant, powerful monument to the genius engineer who vanished forever within the complex domain of his own creation. The story of JDCF Fraser is more than just a cold case. It is a chilling and profound reminder that sometimes the most precise, methodical, and orderly minds are the ones that create the most baffling and enduring chaos when they finally decide to disappear. He left us with a puzzle so elegant and so perfect that it could only have been designed by a mechanical engineer, a genius who planned his escape down to the last, complex mechanical detail, or perhaps a trader who simply sailed away forever in the concealing shroud of the sea fog. But what do you believe happened? Was he a devoted, self-sacrificing husband and father who orchestrated a vanishing act spanning an entire year just to save his family's money and honor? Or was he a disgruntled, betrayed genius who, in a moment of pure rage and pride, sold his vital secrets to the enemy, disappearing into the wartime shadows? Let me know your deepest thoughts and theories about Fraser's final fate in the comments section below. If you enjoyed this deep dive into maritime history, engineered mysteries, and unsolved cold cases, please do me a huge favor and hit that like button, subscribe to the channel for more immersive tales from the shadows of history, and ring that notification bell so you don't miss our next story. Until then, stay safe in the fog.